Thank you, Phil. What an unexpected pleasure to enjoy Phil Sandifer tonight. What I'd like to do is just to show you about 3 verses that I think you'll find from James very pertinent. If you had turned to James chapter 4, how's that? In verse 11, well, I guess it's just 2 verses. Verse 11 and 12. Let's just read them here. Do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you who judge your brother? I think I've told you before about a friend of mine that was the former Fellowship of Christian Athletes director of North Carolina, and I asked him one time how his life was doing. He said, I've had the most wonderful couple of months of my life. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I developed a throat condition and I couldn't speak. So that was my therapy. I couldn't talk. And he said, you would be amazed how godly you can be when you can't talk. And as I got to thinking about it, I said, I guess I am, but really I'm not, because as James says, that the tongue is the very world of iniquity. It is set on fire by hell, and it sets on fire the course of our life. Well, what we're going to look at here is a particular sin. Jesus said that it proceeds from an evil heart. In Mark chapter 7, the Apostle Paul said that the particular sin that we're speaking of here, he called it a word unhygienic, or we would call it rotten, that it is foul to do this. Paul in 1 Timothy spoke about women that would do it, and he said that and it was the strongest term he could use, he said some have turned aside to follow Satan, that it's the discipleship of Satan to do this. As a matter of fact, in Romans chapter 1, when he talked about a society being given over, making a theological exchange to idolatry, then a moral exchange into perversion, he talks then about the complete societal breakdown, and one of the phrases that talks about a complete devolution and amorality of society was this sin. That is the discipleship of the devil. It's the emulation of the devil to do it. 1 John states that if you do it, you demonstrate your lostness. It is the attribute of men who don't know God. Peter said that he who means to love life and see good days don't do this. It's kind of Peter's baccalaureate address as to how to really enjoy life. You can't do this and win friends or influence people or enjoy life as it's meant to be. The book of Proverbs says if you see a person doing this, have nothing to do with them. Run from them. Question is, what is it? As a matter of fact, it's a particular evil that the sin is a sin that is personally ascribed as the name of the enemy of God. He is called Satan, which means an adversary, and he is also called the devil. That is a phonetic shortening of the word diabolo. We get the word diabolical, and when it's used in a verb form, the word balo means to throw, ball. The word dia means to throw through. It's the idea of hurling something with great force and harming someone. And this is the word that is our word for slander. Whenever you go behind someone, it's not a confrontation of the face, but whenever you go behind someone's back and you bring them up in conversation and you speak against them, you harm them. Or you can do like Christians do, we merely ask for prayer requests. We would never gossip or slander, but we kind of launder it in other ways. Diabolical. Anyone that's ever done this to you, the chances are that you can remember in living color who they were, when they did it, and what they said about you. you think less of these people that behind your back, without any second opinion, will go to neutral parties and murder your reputation and incite people against you. You have the lowest opinion of these people. One man said, named Robert West, he said, it takes no great character to do this. It takes some guts to do a confrontation, doesn't it? But it takes no great character to go behind somebody's back and influence others against them. It takes no great brains, because you don't have to argue your position, because no one will come to counter what you've said. It takes no fear of God, because there's no great things that come from it. It is the lowest thing that you can do. And as a matter of fact, it's applied to the devil, who is the accuser or the slanderer of the brethren. See also the book of Job, that he accuses us day and night before the Father. And we are appealed to by the grace of God. To a man particularly, a male of the species, these fellows that will do this, if you ever have a guy do this to you, a man will reserve his greatest invectives for another man that does this behind his back. Now, we have a name for it as men. You can't say it here in church, but it has to do with the droppings of a particular barnyard animal, a fowl. And that's what men think about men that do that. I guess women just go, dang you, but not men. We will ascribe some pretty foul notions to that man. Aren't you excited about being at Metro tonight? Lay it on the Tom. Let me tell you, when we look at this, this is a virus that all of us have. And I'll tell you why, because we all have a tendency to do this. Whenever somebody wrongs us and their name comes up in conversation, there's something about us that we have a tendency that if we don't slander that person and bring justice, that somehow the entire moral government of the universe is going to fall apart. That's the way we feel. Because we won't go out and lie about somebody. What we'll do is we'll tell the truth, and we will set ourselves up in a position we don't belong to. We set ourselves up as judge and then as executioner. Because we really feel that if we don't say this, that other people might think good of them. And these people cannot be good because they're at odds with us. And so we have to bring all condemnation and damnation against them. And whenever you do this, you not only feel holy when you do it, you feel kind of like Charlton Heston, you know. When somebody comes across your conversation that you don't like, you feel an obligation, you know. It's like shooting skeet. You want to say pull, and boom, you just shoot them down. And you feel very strong when you do it. You also feel very popular. There's a proverb that says that the words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels, and they descend into the innermost parts. People never forget it. And whenever you talk about someone in gossip, everybody wants to listen to what you say. So whenever you slander someone else, you get a feeling of almost divinity, of justice. The only problem is that it's called in this text idolatry, that we have set ourselves up in a position as judge and executioner that doesn't belong to us, as there is but one who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? As we start looking at this text, I want to clear something up here, because there's a bad backwash that can come out of this. We're talking here about judgment. Christians acting in judgment. If you don't watch it, you can have a group of people leave here with no moral acumen whatsoever. Paul said to the Corinthian church, do you not judge those within the church? They had a fellow that was living with his stepmother in incest, and they wouldn't do anything. Paul said, I've already judged him. Now, I thought you said, judge not, lest you be judged. People are always quoting that verse as if somehow, if you're a Christian, you have no sense of moral right and wrong. Let me tell you what judgment doesn't mean. Judgment doesn't mean that we don't have a critical sense of right and wrong. Not knowing the difference between right and wrong is not a godly attribute. It's a quality of the naive that proceed and are destroyed. Now, when Jesus said, "Judge not, lest you be judged," you have to go ahead and quote the rest of the verse. He said, "Judge not, lest you be judged. For in the manner that you judge another, it shall be judged unto you. First take the log out of your eye, that you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's." It assumes that it's good to point out to somebody a wrong. But you just don't bring a standard if you're violating that standard. Physician, heal thyself. Paul put it like this: if a man is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore him in a spirit of gentleness, looking to yourselves, lest you too be tempted, meaning toward pride. Let each man examine his own work. Then he'll have reason for boasting in regard to himself alone. You who are spiritual, if you're not guilty of it, then you can help somebody else out. Now that's what that means. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't judge. It doesn't mean that you can't go to someone in private and say, "What you're doing is wrong, and I love you, and we need to turn it around." That's a spirit of gentleness, trying to restore them and help them. But you first make sure about you. Paul put it like this: you who say that one should not steal, do you steal? You who say that one should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? So before I step off that pew down there and step up here, believe you me, I realize that when I start telling you what to do, God's going to play my own tape back at me. I get judged by my own sermons. Listen, I've had more than once that my dear wife has looked at me and said, "All right, Mr. Song of Solomon man, here's what you said, you better start doing it." So that's what judgment means. Are we all solid right off the bat? I don't want everybody walking out here and being able to watch a gang rape in a parking lot and say, "Hey, judge not." That's not what we're talking about. So, not judging means don't be a hypocrite. You who are spiritual, restore them, don't harm them in a spirit of gentleness, and look out for yourself that you don't fall in the same hole. All right? Secondly, judgment means a censorious, harsh manner. That you slander, that you set yourself up as the executioner. And that's this text. That's when the Bible talks about the evil of judgment. That's what it's talking about. When you tell someone to do what you're not doing, and then secondly, instead of, if I have a problem with Doug, instead of going to Doug and saying, "My dear brother Doug, I've noticed you doing something, speaking to Carrie in such a way. Let me say to you that I've messed up like this with my wife myself. God forgive me. And I want to point out a blind spot. I'll help you with it." Now that is a godly sense of judgment, of helping. A wicked way is if I see Doug do something wrong, and then I bring it up to you, and I act as executioner. That's a wicked sense of judgment. So are we all solid there? Now, it's to that latter deal that this text addresses. To set yourself up, not as a help to somebody, but as an executioner. And it's the virus of a Christian that knows Bible. This is a virus, is to act as judge, jury, and the sentencer upon people that we don't like. Let's just look at the command. Verse 11, he says, don't do it. Do not kata lege, speak against one another, brethren. And here's why it tells you not to do it. Because to do so is a demeaning thing to the Bible. It's a demeaning thing to God. And it's an idolatrous view of yourself. It puts yourself in the position of only God. He states in verse 11, he who speaks against his brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. What if you judge the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. What that simply means is there were a number of times in the Old Testament that the law explicitly tells you not to slander, but to love your neighbor as yourself. My job is to recognize my finiteness, the greatness of the lawgiver, God, the exaltation of the law, and I am to bend my neck underneath the yoke of the divine word. For me to be a judge of another man in an unjudicious way, in an unkind way, an executioning way, it's to look at the Bible and not bend to it, but to put myself over it. And so James is addressing the strongest terms. Listen, Jews gloried in their Bible so deeply that the major Old Testament texts we had were like 800 AD. AD, because the Jews would burn their Torah. They would bury them or burn them. That's how holy they were, that they wouldn't demean them. Whenever they would copy the law, they would copy, the scribes would, they would copy a letter, look at the next letter, copy it, look at the next letter, copy it, come to the Word God, lay down their quill, wash their hands, pray, and then write the whole name. And they were under rules that if a king walked into the room, you could not stop in the writing of the name Yahweh. That's how venerated it was. When you finished that sheet, you counted every letter on every line, every letter on your line. The middle letter, the middle letter, the middle sentence, the middle sentence. And if it didn't perfectly equate, and you weren't letter perfect to the standard, you took the entire page, you threw it away, you started over. That was a scribe. That's how they exalted the law. And so for James to write to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, Jews, and to say for you to slander your brother is to place yourself over the revealed will of God that tells you not to, that is a heinous crime. He goes on in verse 12. You're not only in an exalting position over divine law, but in verse 12, you're over the divine lawgiver. There is one lawgiver and judge. He, or the one who is able to save and destroy. You notice the term one mentioned twice? For me to slander another human being, not to go to them for help, not to do maybe like in 1 Corinthians where Paul said, I have been informed by Chloe's people, there was another church, that there are divisions among you. I think that you can go to someone who is able to help you. Okay? If I were to see Phil do something dastardly that I found out, and I were to say, Doug, don't you know Phil Sandifer pretty well? He'd say, yes, I do. Do you have access to his ear? Yes, you do. Does he listen to you? Can I point out something to you might want to be attuned to? Now, maybe that's not bad. But for me to do what a lot of us do, just to take you in a conversation and to speak against you, to throw something at you from an ambush, it's to make myself God. What a heinous sin. Verse 12, quite a question here. Who are you to judge, meaning to bring painful execution to another man? The proverb says, have nothing to do with a whisperer, for he divides intimate friends. Have nothing to do with this person. Who are you? Can I show you a text that to me, whenever I come to a place of unforgiveness, of wanting to bring judgment on somebody who's harmed me, that God brings to my mind, and it does havoc with my soul. Who are you? Let me show this to you. Why we forgive. God forgives us because His holiness has been satisfied in the death of Christ, freeing His mercies to do so, allowing Him to consistently maintain His unity as God. You and I don't forgive people because our holiness has been appeased. We forgive people because we were forgiven. Amen? How can you and I not forgive fellow criminals? Who are you? Let me show you something here. In Matthew 18, let me ruin your night. Listen, This text, God brings it more to my mind whenever I get to feeling the motions of deity, that I really need to stick it to somebody that he would deserve it. Just a real quick little text talking about forgiveness. In 18:21 of Matthew, Peter came up to him and said, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times?" The rabbi said you had to forgive 3. Peter said, "I'll double you and go you 1 more." And I'm sure that he thought he was going to get a wonderful commendation from Jesus because he had such a broad picture of forgiveness. Christ said in 22, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but 70 times 7, which means an infinite amount of forgiveness." Oh, gracious. 23, "For this reason the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a certain king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves." Now, God is the king and you and I are the slave. "And when he had begun to settle them, there was brought to him one who owed him 10,000 talents. A talent is a weight of about 70 pounds. 10,000 talents I think it's $18 million. Some guy got himself in debt, $18 million. Now you say, "Hey, that's nothing." Oh, I'm working on it. Now this is an extreme debt. You're thinking, what kind of idiot gets into $18 million worth of debt? Well, this guy has a debt that he can't pay. Question, who is the king that has all rights to destroy the idiot? God is the king. Who's the idiot? It's us. Yeah, as you look at this parable, do like this. All right? Because that's you. In the mirror. We had a debt we could not pay. He paid a debt he did not owe. So there is infinite guilt. Verse 25, he didn't have the means to repay. His Lord commanded him to be sold, along with his wife, children, all that he had, repayment to be made. That is just. He loses his life. But in verse 26, the slave, therefore, falling down, prostrated himself. Meaning he laid face down and said, "I have no judicial cause for mercy. I have nothing to appeal to. I am with empty hands." He doesn't say to the king, "You're wrong for destroying me." He has nothing to say. He merely asks for one thing, patience. I love this in 26. "Have patience, and I'll repay you everything." Really? How are you going to pay back $18 million? I mean, you're going to take 9 $2 million installments and pay them back? Now, verse 26, he deserved to die right there for that statement. But you know what this fellow did? Verse 27, the Lord of the slave felt compassion and released him. Now, folks, that's you and I and God. That we owed him a debt that was so egregious, so enormous that there was no way, there was nothing we could do. And our repentance was full of holes, just like this fellow. But God had mercy. Aren't you glad? Watch this. But that slave went out and found one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. That's 100 days' wages. That's pocket change. And that's what people do against us. They don't sin against our holiness. We have no holiness to sin against. They sin against God, and we get splattered. For us to forgive, we don't have to say, "I can forgive you," but I have to crucify my own son in your place that my holy divinity can be assuaged. Do any of us say that? We don't have to because we're evil. We forgive because we've been forgiven. We were forgiven an infinite amount, and what we have to forgive is pocket change. Verse 28, he seized him and began to choke him and said, pay back what you owe. He had no compassion. He has no patience. And even in verse 29, even a fellow slave falls down and entreats him, have patience and I'll pay you everything. He is unwilling, threw him in prison. He wants justice. He'd been given mercy, but he wants justice. And it's interesting in 31 that even a fellow slave knew that was wrong. He was deeply grieved. And they reported to their Lord all that had happened. And summoning him, the Lord said to him, you wicked slave. I forgave you the debt because you entreated me. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you? And the Lord, moved with anger, handed him over to the torturers until he should repay all that was owed him. So shall my heavenly Father do to you if each of you don't forgive his brother. Boy, that's some stern words. Verse 34 is to be taken simplistically. The man went to hell because truly saved people do not carry grudges like this. When you have been touched by the mercy of God, blessed are the merciful, they shall receive mercy. The way you can tell a truly converted man, he's tasted of the forgiveness of God so he can be forgiving to others. Question. Can you answer from James now? Who are you to judge, to be the executioner of one that harmed you? Answer, I'm a slave that was forgiven a great debt. I'm not the lawgiver. It comes from his nature. I wasn't sinned against. God was sinned against. I didn't have to be appeased in my holiness. God did. God forgives because Christ died. I forgive because I should have. Incidentally, I have never, ever met in any of my ministry, in any of my travels, a happy, well-liked, unforgiving person. If you are a person that gives in to slander, it's because you probably haven't really met the Lord. And you don't know what it is to be forgiven. If you're a Christian that does this, you're probably under divine judgment. And the fact is, probably nobody likes you. Because you're just so unlikable. You're foul. You have cankered. You have had grace given you that's gone sour. And you've placed yourself in an idolatrous position. Nobody looks as dumb as a human playing God. Let me make your night a little worse. All the visitors are looking around at the guy who brought them saying, hey, thanks a lot. When does he curse our mothers around here? Take a look at another text in Luke 17, just a second. You're saying, Tom, sometimes I don't feel. I mean, this guy really hurt me. Are we supposed to forgive because we feel like forgiving? I want to show you the most freeing text that will help you in slander. In Luke 17, this is a completely different text. Verse 4, Jesus had to say these to these fellows a number of times. Listen, folks, you're thinking the disciples may have had it easy. These are the same guys that went to get Jesus a motel room in Samaria, and they wouldn't give him one because he was facing toward Jerusalem. And James and John came and said, would you like us to call fire down on them now or later? So they had a great sense of justice. These men had to get changed. They struggled with it. And if in verse 3, if you're be on your guard, if your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. If he sins against you 7 times a day, that's about every 2 hours, and returns 7 times saying, I repent, forgive him. That's incredible. Does anyone here really believe that that fellow that hurt you and came back every 2 hours is sincere? Does anyone here feel like that person is sincere? Of course not. So what is my forgiveness not based on? My feeling. It's not even based on my logic. I forgive because I'm told. Well, in verse 5, they all asked the question that we would have asked. Lord, increase our faith. I got to be a spiritual giant to forgive these people. And Jesus said in verse 6, if you had faith like a mustard seed. Contrast increase with mustard seed, meaning you don't need great faith. I'm not asking you to be Gideon. I'm not asking you to charge the Amalekites. I'm not asking you, Joshua, to go out and fight against these guys. All I'm asking you to do is to do to somebody what I've done to you. He says, if you had faith like a mustard seed, which is like a pinprick, tiny little thing, you would say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. It doesn't take great faith. It just takes simple faith. I'm not asking you to be a spiritual giant. I'm asking you to obey me. Meaning, my forgiveness is not based upon my feelings. It's not based upon my great faith. I do it because I'm told. Now watch this. Verse 7 through 10 may be the most taken out of context parable Jesus ever told. There is no break between verse 6 and verse 7. It's one story. He's going to give you a story about doing something that you don't feel like doing. Which one of you, having a slave plowing or tending sheep, so now we're the guys telling others what to do instead of those that are being told what to do. Which one of you that's a boss will say to him when he has come in from the field, come immediately sit down and eat? Will he not say to him, prepare something for me to eat? Clothe yourself and serve me until I have eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink? Well, the answer is, of course. How many of you that are employers, and some guy has put in a hard day, it's 4:30. He comes to you, you know he's tired. What do you ask him to do? Hey, I want you to run over here to the deli. I need a little something. Pick it up, bring it over here. Does the fellow feel like doing it? No. Why does he do it? He's told to. Here's this slave that's working all day. He comes in. Do any of you say to him, sit down here and eat? No, you say to him what you say to a slave. Take care of my needs. Feed me. That slave goes in the galley, brings out from the kitchen this roast beef, little mashed potatoes, gravy coming down the side, little butter right here, iced tea, salad, ranch, salt. All right. What does he feel like doing it? He feels like jumping on that stuff and eating it like he's mad at it. That's his feeling. But what's he do? He takes that food and he does what he is told, not what he feels. His feeling is to say, you get it yourself. I'm going to go home and eat it. I'm hot and dirty. He does what he's told. Verse 10, so you too. When you do the things you're commanded, you say, we are unworthy slaves, we've done what we ought to have done. That is in the context, folks. That is not a lesson simply on service. Although that's true. You tell me. What's this parable about? It's doing something when you don't feel like doing it. What's the thing you're to do simply because you're told? Context. What is it? To forgive. You forgive because he tells us to forgive. What if I don't think the fellow's sincere? I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you to forgive. But I'm not a spiritual giant. I'm not asking you to be. You just do it because you're told. I don't feel like doing it. You do it because you're told. Aren't you glad this text is here? This is the most vindicating, freeing text of all the parables to me, and I'll tell you why. Because when somebody hurts me, I feel like hurting them back. And when their name comes up in conversation, it's a skeet shoot. And I want to pop them. I want everybody to know how bad that person was, and I want to act as the lawgiver and judge. I do not feel like forgiving them. This text tells me I don't have to feel anything. I have to do what I'm told. And generally, do you know what that means? For me, it means to hush and not to say anything. Now, This is so important when you're dealing with the world. Titus, Paul to Titus, he says this. He says, we're to be ready for every good deed, to be kind, showing every consideration for all men, to be uncontentious, gentle, knowing that we also were once foolish ourselves, disobedient, deceived, enslaved to various lusts and pleasures, hateful, hurting one another. But when the kindness of God, our Savior, and His love for us appeared, He saved us, not on the basis of works which we did in righteousness, but according to His mercy, by the washing of regeneration and renewing by the Holy Spirit, He poured out on us richly through Jesus Christ our Savior, that being justified by grace, we might be heirs, not earners, but heirs of eternal life. Why should I be kind to those that hurt me? Titus 3, because I was stupid too, and God forgave me. Can you forgive? You can't afford not to. Unforgiveness will make you ugly. It'll make your hair fall out, rot your teeth, make people run from you. It'll poison everything around you. Nothing feels weaker than forgiveness. Nothing shows up more glorious when it's said and done than forgiveness. Let me close you by just, if you want to write some things down, what happens whenever somebody wrongs you and you don't say anything? Can I show you about 7 things that happen? Number 1 is that you have practiced forgiveness. What does the word forgiveness mean in the New Testament? It means to turn loose. You've turned somebody loose just like God had mercy on you. You've become like Christ. Secondly, you've become obedient to God, and that is very pleasing. Do not return evil for evil, nor insult for insult, Peter said, but give a blessing yourself because you were called to receive a blessing. Treat people like God treated you. Thirdly, you have practiced the rare quality that is called self-control. You have talked to your body. You know, in the Psalms, David says, "Why are you in despair, O my soul? Hope in God, for you'll again praise Him, the help of my countenance and my God." We let our bodies talk to us. Our bodies become the final dictum of our conduct. David talked to his body. Paul said, "I buffet my body and make it my slave." You've heard me tell you before what Francis of Assisi called his body. He called it brother ass. Because that's the way our bodies are. They're just like old donkeys that squat on us and don't move. They don't want to do what we tell them to do. So you've now become self-controlled. Fourthly, you have become a quality that is called by some the greatest of all qualities. It's called magnanimity, where you're too big to lower yourself. The Bible says, "He that overlooks a transgression is glorious, but a fool's dishonor is readily seen." Y'all got some people like that you have to walk very tender around them. See what edge of the broom they walked on that morning, you know? Where they're going to explode on you. You touch them kind of like a blasting cap. It's an honor for a person to overlook a transgression because they're so big. Can you imagine Jesus on the cross when they spit on Him? He spits back. Take yourself down from the cross. Well, maybe you just hang around, buddy, and I'm coming back, and I'm going to toast you first. Oh, yeah? Yeah! Oh, yeah? Yeah! Maybe if I could work this foot loose, I'd kick you in the teeth. That's what we would do. That doesn't fit with the Messiah, does it? No, He was like a sheep led dumb to his shearers, like Israel should have been. He didn't look to Egypt. He didn't look to Assyria to help him. He did not anxiously look about. God was there with him. On his right hand, he would uphold him with his righteous right hand. He wouldn't forsake him. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. Matter of fact, Lincoln, on one occasion, they said this was the quality that most set apart Abraham Lincoln. On one occasion, Stanton, Secretary of War, called Abraham Lincoln the original guerrilla. And Lincoln said, well, I might ought to take a look at that because this is a great man. He's seldom wrong. And it was said that whenever Lincoln died, it was Stanton that made the statement, here lies the greatest leader the world has ever seen. So it's a great quality not to stoop down to the level of your accusers. It's glorious. Fifthly, you have become Christ-like. While being reviled, Peter said, and he saw it, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. Trust God. Sixthly, when you don't slander, you allow for divine shame. Paul put it like this, if your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink, for in so doing, you'll heap burning coals on his head. When a person does wrong to another person, and they're treated with magnanimity, they get a foretaste of justice, of the evil of their ways. As a matter of fact, I have noticed with separating couples that the one that is the most in the wrong quite often will try to get the abandoned one provoked to anger, to try to get that woman or to get that man to curse them. Because if they'll curse them, they feel better. Like, I should have left him. I should have run off. I should have had an affair. But whenever you treat them with kindness, it's burning coals. And seventhly, Paul said, you prove yourself a child of God. He said in Philippians chapter 2, do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may prove yourselves blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a perverse, crooked generation among whom you appear as luminaries, as stars in the night, holding forth the word of life. But folks, whenever we are overcome by evil, whenever we drop down to their level, it's like we take our torch and we put it out. Listen, I've got 2 or 3 people that every time their name comes up, I have to bite my tongue, that have truly wronged me, and I keep waiting for a meteor, and it hadn't come yet, and every time their name comes up, I am tempted to go slumming, I'm tempted to go down to where they are, and I'm not going to do it. Because I lose my witness. I'm going to show you one last thing. Let me sink this nail. Let me show you Proverbs 25, just real quick. Proverbs 25, verse 8, probably begins with the end of verse 7. Derek Kidner, the great Cambridge scholar, says 25:8 makes sense by itself, but at the end of verse 7, it makes better sense. You have to remember these verse numbers were added there by men that felt it would make easy reading. But probably the end of verse 7, the last line, is the beginning of verse 8. What your eyes have seen, or whom your eyes have seen, don't go out hastily to argue your case. Meaning, when you see something that happens that you think is bad, don't go out and tell anyone. Don't be a slanderer. And here's why. Otherwise, what will you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame? In other words, what will happen when you find out that you reported it wrongly? Verse 9, argue your case with your neighbor, and do not reveal the secret of another. Jesus Christ paraphrased this when he said, if your brother sins, go to him. How? In private. If you see somebody that hurts you, you go to them. Don't go to me. You go to them. Because in verse 10, it says at the end of 9, don't reveal the secret of another. That's when you slander. Lest he who hears it reproach you, and the evil report about you not pass away. If you have called it wrongly, you are labeled forever as a gossip. If somebody wrongs you, go to them. I buried a fellow in our congregation about 8 hours ago. No, about 7 ago. 57 years old, Ken McIntyre. Not a famous man. Came to know Jesus Christ when he was 5 years of age. Went to his mama. Said he wanted to become a Christian. She said, you're too little. He said, no, I'm not. And talked his mama into it, and he became a Christian with his mama. His wife told me, she said, we were married 34 years, and in 34 years, he never raised his voice. In 34 years. Not just said a bad thing, never raised his voice. Worked for the Postal Service, worked on the North Texas campus. I have a buddy who said that when he would go into the post office, even though there's lines there, no matter how long the line was, he would get in the one that went to Ken McIntyre because he said he was always pleasant. A fellow in our church that had him in a 2-7 group said in all the time that he taught him, he never heard him say one word against another human. He was so pleasant, so kind. And did his wedding today and had whole bunches of people. Interrupted their day, came out at 2 o'clock just to honor his memory. Deeply loved. It'll take a bunch of good people to replace him in our church. Died of cancer, lymphoma. And that was the redeeming quality. Everybody loved him because his tongue was so chaste. And I'll tell you why. Because Ken loved God and he knew his Bible, and he knew that God forgave him. He knew that God forgave him $18 million. He knew that his life and works didn't merit it, but God had compassion and forgave him. So how could he go and call another man to judgment when he had been shown mercy? And he was deeply loved. And you will be too. There is no more warm magnetism, no more greatness that a man or a woman can have than one that is truly merciful and compassionate, tender and kind. Who are you to judge your brother? There is one lawgiver and one judge, and it's not us. Well, let's pray then. Father in heaven, we are all dead to rights. This is a virus that all moral creatures struggle with. That when I sin, I long to be forgiven. And when I am sinned against, so often I go into a transformation. And I elevate myself to the very right hand of God. And I seek justice. It was not my law that was breached. It was not my nature that was offended. It was not my edict of justice that was flouted. Not my covenant with man that was breached. It was God's. To say as David, against thee and thee only have I sinned. And I pray, Father, if there are any of these men and women here who have caused their lives to fester, to canker, to become unnerving to be around, to be unedifying, because of what they perceived as a very judicious and very upright spirit. Let them know that they have fallen into the sin of idolatry. There is a time, and there is a place, there is a way to approach an offending person. Even if they are removed from the body of Christ and given to the devil, that they might be taught not to blaspheme. There's a place, but there's a way to do it. And this is not the way. By character assassination, by diabolicalness of injuring another with a misplaced word. So help me to be gracious in my speech. A gracious woman attaineth honor. Help us, God. We'll ask it. For Christ's sake, amen.